Greetings, YouTube. This is DecKrash, better known as Brandon. To those of you who read part 1 of my story, I do thank you, even though the reception for it seemed quite a bit colder than I thought. But then again, I know that reading just a couple of chapters out of a story is not always the best way to get the feel for it. Although I have been told that when you read a book, if you're not drawn in by the first few paragraphs, chances are you may not like it all that much. And I've found that to be true with many stories. I just would respectfully ask that if you're not going to give me a serious critique, and just going to say something smarmy, I would rather you not say anything. Not that I didn't think the couple of comments I got with the story weren't funny, but I would really like to have some thought put on the story, rather than just people being silly. But regardless of that, I'm going to go ahead and move on, because maybe when people get into the depths of the story, they're going to be able to give me a more robust critique, and maybe that's what some are waiting for. And if not, well, this is something I'm just doing for fun. So anyway, without further ado, here is part 2 of Her Hand in Mine. I was glad that Servana took the initiative to leave first, because I think I panicked. It was as if every memory of every part of her voice, her soft, almost powdery scent, and the memory of her velvet touch came back, rolling into my mind and through my senses in slow, cutting increments, and ignited a fire within me, both urgent and painful. I existed in a fevered half-dream as I ambled through the city corridors, wondering what was wrong with me, my mind reeling and overflowing with burning memories. I muttered half-spoken apologies to the humans I bumped into and gave the Felians a wide berth. Once I passed by a Felian pair, the Ankia technician being distinctively female. Her scent, a scent that I had been warned about countless times in school, stoked the fire within to an unbearable heat. I bordered on anxiety and sickness. I had to force myself not to run to the pleasure house. Chester was no longer there, much to my relief. But even more of a blessing was the sight of Keisha still at the bar and doing her closing rounds. And all at once the fire focused on her. I approached her with all the suave confidence I could muster, despite the flames that threatened to consume the coherent thought. I found it easy to get to her to overlook my earlier snub. Once she found that I was genuinely interested. She had been skeptical at first. I'd expected as much. But then I was surprised to see her capacity for forgiveness. She took off early, and we retreated to the private rooms, where I learned that her skills went well beyond bartending. I remember that night as one remembers the troubled dreams born of a high fever. Once did not satisfy me, neither did twice, nor even 3 times. It was as if my apathy towards women had been merely a wall of ice, and someone had flash melted that once impenetrable barrier into a tsunami of pent-up frustration that I unleashed upon an unsuspecting female. I counted as fortunate that Keisha was far from delicate, and gave as much as I did in the bargain as we exhausted ourselves, and the painful fire was blessedly quenched by way of our carnal deluge. I was overtaken by an uncontrollable laugh as I lay there upon the mess of sheets and blankets, Keisha sleeping soundly beside me. I laughed long and raucously, and she slept on, her exhaustion absolute and deafening her to its volume. But there was no humor in that laugh. God, what happened? Were the only words I remember saying after that laugh, which sapped most of my remaining strength. My voice was as the voice of one nearly dead. I felt 2 tears roll thinly from my eyes as I was overwhelmed by something akin to regret, and in that moment before surrendering to refreshing sleep, I realized that it was not the sex that I regretted, but what had driven me to it. Something had changed inside me, switched on something new, strange, and alien, and I fell like so much kindling to its power. I can only count it fortunate that I slept as deeply and dreamlessly as Keisha had. I awoke groggy and confused, and having forgotten most of last night. I vaguely remembered Keisha, and for the moment had no memory of Servana. A folded piece of paper lay beside me in the empty bed, with an address and phone code on it that hinted at my previous night, in addition to the kiss mark I noticed upon my forehead in deep reddish brown in the mirror of the bathroom. The scent of sex that remained on the covers and on my person jogged my memory at last, and I wished it hadn't. I softly swore as I wiped the lipstick from my forehead, crumpling Keisha's little morning afternote in my hand. I did not throw it away, but I halfway wanted to. I can't say why I didn't, because quite frankly, I did not know myself. I think it was because of some part of me thought it was rude, despite the fact that I woke up feeling no more attracted to her than when Chester and I arrived at the pleasure house that evening. I washed the scent off of me, wishing that the water in the shower could have dissolved the confusion and shame. I picked through the rumpled sheets of the bed afterwards and fished out my now much wrinkled clothes. I silently dressed myself and removed my phone from its pants pocket to find a message from Chester. "Somebody got laid last night," the message read with a laughing emoticon floating in the text hologram. A sour feeling spread through me and I swore again, furiously erasing it. It seemed that Chester and Keisha knew each other a little better than I had first supposed, and that did not bode well for me, least of all my sense of privacy. I did clearly remember his confession to knowing in advance of Cheryl Althea's having spiked my drink, and I had still not forgiven him for that. The last thing I needed was him wailing on me about Keisha and what a hypocrite I was. At least this time I knew I hadn't been drugged. I didn't feel like crap when I woke up, or was stricken with the shakes for the rest of the following day like I'd been that night with Cheryl. That was when the memory of my reunion with Sarvana returned to mind, refreshment that washed away the bitter parts of my memory. A smile returned to my face, and my worries were pushed away into a distant universe. In far better spirits than before, I slung my tool bag over my shoulder and, checking the time and seeing how little of it remained before noon, hurried home to find a fresher change of clothes. I would be lying if I said that Sarvana's very unexpected presence in my home didn't at first scare the living hell out of me. "Funny, how the hell—" I began, realizing that it wasn't a thief. Her smile disarmed me quite literally as the knife I'd quickly drawn clattered to the ground. "I let myself in," she said. "I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" I fumbled for the knife on the ground, coming just short of slicing my hand open as I hurriedly and discreetly sheathed it in my belt. "You thought I was a robber." Sarvana shook with a silent giggle. "It's no joke," I protested. "You wouldn't believe the people who would love to break into an unfixed person's home. Good thing the locks and the doors are encrypted so—" My eyes suddenly narrowed. "Wait a minute. Just how did you get in here anyway?" "My people designed the locks," Sarvana said matter-of-factly, as she placed the necklace that she had been admiring back onto the table where it sat with other jewelry that I designed. "And my father heads all the work on these systems." "Stupid question, then," I said, feeling quite stupid myself. Sarvana shook her head. "You didn't know, so you can't blame yourself. And I know that this was a bit forward of me. You humans do appreciate your privacy, after all." "So what do I owe the surprise?" I asked. I just couldn't wait until noon," Sarvana answered, rounding my dinner table as she approached me. "I thought you'd be home, but I was rather surprised that you weren't. I let myself in, thinking that you might still be sleeping late like you did when we were kids. I hope I wasn't crossing any lines." "No, you're always welcome here," I said, smiling once again. "I was about to leave," Sarvana said. "I arrived here a while ago, but, well—" She gestured vaguely to the massive collection of my artwork stored upon the equally massive shelf in the back. "My little stash kept you here," I said. Sarvana nodded. "It's quite impressive." She stole a second glance back at the shelf, her striped tail swishing back and forth with interest. "You've obviously been busy since I left Zinj." I moved over to the shelf, guiding Sarvana along with me to the cushion where the necklace she had been admiring rested. It was made of brass that I had woven into a braided form and housed a small green jewel of colored glass. Sarvana's eyes immediately rested upon it and its sister, a necklace that I had found rather than made. The jewel that hung from its silver chain was a tiny sparkling amethyst cut into the shape of a tear, so that it looked like a glistening purple raindrop that hung from misty clouds. "I did notice a lot of Felian style in your artwork," Sarvana said. "Oh?" Surprised, I gave my art a cursory glance and recalled the things that I had learned of Felian culture, both from data files and what Sarvana had taught me. I was speechless for a moment, as I honestly had not realized that so much of my art did truly sport styles and script that was Felian. It was like I had unconsciously tapped into forgotten memories and expressed them in the moldings of metal, glass, stone, and plastic in my artwork, or fashioned them into Felian archetypes. "There's Trisi, the heroine of the Silver Moon," Sarvana said, pointing to a small figurine near the top of the shelf. Her hand then moved to a steel bracelet in the middle of the third shelf. "And that bracelet's covered with Felian script, though it doesn't mean anything. Oh, and that tree you made out of copper wiring looks just like a hammock tree on our homeworld. I could go on, you know." I actually wanted her to, but I felt that it would be best for me to rediscover these things myself. Her few descriptions alone made me realize that I had a lot to relearn about just how much of her memory I had placed into this artwork. "But it's all quite beautiful, Jules," she said, returning her gaze toward me. "But it seems that you've been just piling it up. Why don't you sell it? You ought to have quite a market for it." "I can't," I said, frowning. "Can't bear to part with it?" Savannah said. "Are you afraid of criticism?" "Me? Afraid?" My eyebrows nodded as I folded my arms in front of me. "Not at all. It's just that I can't show them off. It would raise too many alarms." Savannah made a tiny, brief noise, almost a growl, but one that rose in pitch. It was the way Felians expressed an inability to comprehend. "The materials I made this stuff with," I explained, "are often very hard to come by, and also illegal to own if taken off of a scrapping site. It's all raw and unprocessed. It'd be easy to detect, which the government does at trade meets. I'd be found out in a heartbeat. And how much I've collected over the years. And with how much I've collected over the years, I'd be sterilized at very least and thrown out of the city at worst, without the benefit of protection." "All over scrap metal knickknacks?" Savannah said, unbelieving. "It's our life blood," I said, unmoved by her reaction of shock and horror. "It's like stealing gold from a gold mine. The only reason I get away with it is because my friend Chester works security and he looks the other way for me." "It's still utterly draconian to me," Savannah said, fingering the necklace from earlier. "But I guess you have to be strict to keep the profits going." "You recovered from that pretty quickly," I remarked. "There are worse places than Zinj," Savannah told me, in a voice that betrayed not a bit of humor. Be thankful you haven't seen Zaid." "I've heard of it," I said. "We get some of our slaves from there. We have to keep a close eye on them because most of them are hardened criminals. It's said that we treat them better here than on their homeworld, though." "Slavery. Another thing I wish there was less of," Savannah said. Her tone was cold, but her words are not directed at me. "I do too," I said, thinking back to the incident from last week. I still couldn't get over my distaste at having to corral the slaves in our caravan, and then having to blow out the engines and then shoot the slaves in order to stop a full-on revolt. Desperate for a less depressing subject, I took note of how Savannah's gaze kept going back to the two necklaces. "See something you like, or are you just browsing?" I joked. Again she made the uncomprehending sound, but then her eyes brightened as they came to rest upon her hand, which was still touching the necklace. "Oh, that?" she said. "Yes, it is pretty, isn't it?" "The gold one was pretty easy to make," I said. "The materials are fairly common and cheap, just colored glass and brass, but I found the silver one. It took a long time for me to scrounge up enough silver to fix it." "No doubt," Savannah said. "And you'd still get in trouble even over the gold one, even though it's just brass and glass?" "I'm afraid so." Savannah hummed in a mischievous way, and I saw the same emotion come to life in her violet eyes as they glanced shrewdly my way. "Then, for the public good, I ought to turn you in, Julius Galway." She pursed her lips and shifted her eyebrows in mock deviousness, appearing to search her thoughts. "Unless I receive just compensation for my silence." "Oh," I said, playing along. "And what would appease you, director's daughter?" "Merely a bauble," Savannah said, and took the golden necklace into her furry gray hands. "A token you'll never miss, such as this. A small price for my silence." I couldn't help but allow a chuckle to escape me. "True, a small price," I said, taking the necklace and slipping it around her neck. I fastened the clasp, and Savannah removed a tiny device from a pouch that was fastened to her belt. A sparkling liquid metal, something like mercury, rose up from a slot at its head and flattened itself in a perfect circle which reflected the image of her face. She admired herself in this strange mirror for several moments, and then squeezed the device. The circle became amorphous once again and shrank back into the tiny slot. "How do you think it looks?" Savannah said with a wide, eager grin. "Beautiful," I said, surprised at how easily this compliment came out. "Ever the sweetie," Savannah said, her expression softening. "But I've always liked that about you." She seemed to have forgotten that I embarrassed myself quite richly with those compliments in our childhood, at a time where girls were yucky and Felian girls were just plain weird. But with Savannah, I gave them because they made her happy. But this time, I meant it from the bottom of my heart. "But I think the silver one would look better on you, Vani," I said. "I mean, it matches your fur better, as well as your eyes." "No, not that one," Savannah said in a tone that was surprisingly dismissive. "Why not?" She shifted her gaze from the necklace to me, and then to the necklace again. "I'll tell you what. Look up Nali." and then ask me again." She flashed me a wink. "Nali?" It was a Felian word, but I had no idea what it meant. "Yes." "All right then," I said, and then excused myself to go and put on a change of clothes. Servana had not seemed to notice just how ugly and wrinkled my current apparel was, or how it was the same thing that I had worn the previous day. I hurried to my room and dressed, and then, once ready to go, rejoined Servana, who had still been admiring my collection. She excitedly took me by the hand and led me through the residential sector at a brisk pace. As I did this, I was reminded of how we used to tear through the city corridors as children, playing space pirates, causing a ruckus wherever we went. I laughed at her enthusiasm, and she laughed with me, and it was as if our laughter echoed in those child voices. At the same time, I was relieved that most of the city's population was still at work, leaving the corridors empty with no stares or condescending looks in regards to our closeness. But there was also shame at that relief, and my emotions fought a grand stalemate as Servana practically danced to the elevator that led to the Arboretum. "You're in a good mood," I said, once the door opened in the dampness and fresh green scents of the Arboretum's forests and flowers. "Why wouldn't I be?" Servana said, stepping out onto the path. "I'm back on Zinj with the best human I've ever known." I felt my cheeks redden with that compliment. "Oh, come on. I'm sure you've met better humans than me." "My people have a saying," Servana said. "A friend ascends higher than the famous. You're my friend, Jules, and in my eyes, you're better than even the nicest humans I've met. I never stayed long enough on the other worlds to truly make any close relationships." She paused and pursed her lips thoughtfully. "Oh, wait, there was this one human. Alexa was her name. I think I met her on Saburna." "Alexa?" I said, my curiosity piqued a bit more than I thought it would be. "The Alexa? Dragon Lady Alexa?"
"Oh, well, the pit crew called her the Dragon Bitch, actually."
Servana snorted a tiny giggle.
"And I guess she was, after a fashion, but they never said it to her face. She was rather sweet to me, in her own way. That being said, I think she rubbed off on me a little. I saw a bit of it when you gave me this. You saw a bit of it when you gave me this."
Her fingers went to the jewel that hung from her necklace. So much for asking her about what Alexa was like, I thought. So she's the mischievous, aggressive type? It kind of figures with her tactics in the arena.
"I saw her in action at the tournaments,"
Servana said, mirroring my keen interest and excitement.
"She's downright brutal, but she's got talent. Made it to the semi-finals last season without breaking a sweat."
I grinned vaguely. Steel Dragon wasn't exactly my favorite gestalt, and I was not a huge fan of the pilot, but I was forced to agree, albeit grudgingly, with Servana. "You know, my friend Chester likes her too, but I think it's a bit more for the aesthetics of the pilot than for any talent."
"Typical human males,"
Servana said with a rueful grin. She shook her head, laughing softly, more to herself, I believe, than me.
"I doubt he'd like her that much, though."
"Oh," I said. She most certainly did not know Chester from Adam. "Why would you say that?" Servana made a curious half-smile.
"Let's just say that she wouldn't meet the specifications that most Zinj humans have for species."
I wanted to protest, but the words died on my lips. I couldn't argue with her without being a hypocrite. She was right. My people were almost irrationally fixated on genetic purity, but looking at our history, few could blame us. Since the Felians saved us from certain death from our own planet's ravaged environment after the Imperium Wars, Zinj adopted its current sterilization policy not only to prevent overpopulation in the limited space of our cities, but also to protect us from giving birth to horrendous mutations. Felian medical techniques cleaned up the residual genetic damage from the radiation, but the threat of such things loomed over us for a long time after the war. Couple that with plain old human paranoia, and you had a recipe for some of the most provincial attitudes about race since the Dark Ages. With that in mind, it was obvious that Alexa was a mutant of some kind, unless human freaks with scales and sharp teeth were commonplace on one of the colonies. "Maybe so," I said, "but she is a girl, and Chester's not what you'd call picky."
"Most likely he doesn't need to be,"
Servana said, pausing to watch a hawk fly high above in the massive cavern, but safely below the heat of the sun lamps.
"Is he fixed?"
"Yeah," I said, understanding the point she was trying to make. "So he's got nothing holding him back, and they get to play around all they want."
"You talk as if they're the lucky ones."
For the first time I saw Servana frown. "It's not what I mean," I said quickly. "I never cared either way."
You don't want a family someday? Savannah asked. Her disappointed tone reminded me of how Keisha sounded that night with Chester. But for some reason I was not disturbed when Savannah, being Felian, had said it, only saddened. I wouldn't mind it, I said, reassuring myself as well as her. But I've never found anyone I thought was mother material. Most girls I've known have only been interested in me for a cheap lay. I doubt they'd only want to bear my children. Oh, I think you give them too little credit, Savannah said with almost motherly confidence, as well as yourself. Well, I need to make my decision quickly, I said. I don't have much time left. I'm 21, and that's the age people expect someone like me to find an unfixed girl to settle down with and start making babies. It's a sad day when such a beautiful thing as childbirth gets reduced to a civic duty, Savannah said. I too felt the sting of truth in her words, but I knew that there was nothing I'd be able to do about it. Besides, it wasn't that I hated the status quo. Those like me were expected to reproduce, and thus keep the population of the colony in balance. Thanks to the Felian benefit of near-perfect contraceptives, we were allowed to play around until my age, when it was expected that we would settle down and raise a family. We do love our children and care for them, I said, and I knew this was at least true. Yes, but I've lived here on Zinj long enough, and known about it from my tutors to know that even the unsterilized would rather play around with no consequences, Savannah countered. Even those who have settled down rarely stay for a lifetime with their mates. What you have that substitutes for marriages never lasts long. Your parents are still together, right? I nodded. It's a rarity now. Yes, I said somberly. I know. Savannah, after a long silence that bordered on awkward, at last heaved a long sigh. I'm sorry, she said with genuine contrition. I didn't mean to let the conversation get so heavy. We ought to first focus on happier things. I smiled a little, very much desiring a change of subject as well. You know, Saburna's a little bit like Zinj in most places, she said. A great deal of nothing except rocks and sand as far as you can see. But you can breathe the atmosphere there. You know, I'll bet that if they could find a way to hold the Gestalt tournaments here, it would be much more challenging than Saburna could ever make them. And the losers get their Gestalt scrapped by the best in the business. My remark evoked a laugh from us both. I gather you liked it there, I said afterwards. It was most likely my favorite among the human worlds, Savannah said. Perhaps it was the pit town that made it so interesting. For humans, you can find just about any mechanical part you want there. The Gestalt's so huge and there are so many merchants around, even the pits of the stadium are like small towns. Again, Savannah had a captive audience in me as we slowly made our way through the Arboretum's mile-and-a-half long path, practically alone with nothing but each other. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. She talked about Saburna, and then the near-suicidal harvesters of Dilk and Silk on Sepra, braving mutants of its dense wilds, the magnificent dragons of Tintagel 9, and the vast orbital garrison above the otherwise bucolic world of Halo Meridian. I had become a child again, dreaming of one day seeing those other worlds that humanity had emigrated to from Earth so long ago. I did not care that those dreams were in vain. I merely let my mind wander with Savannah's words and enjoyed her presence, all cares of who would notice our entwined hands, all but a distant memory. It's too bad I'll only have a month here, was the phrase she uttered that violently and abruptly shook me from my dreamlike state. We were beside the waterfall, and I barely heard her over its roar. But I was almost certain that I had heard that bit of information. Quickly I brought her some distance away to the base of a small hill between the waterfall and ourselves, where it was quieter. Did you just say a month? I asked, not quite believing. Savannah nodded. I'm afraid so, Jules. We're only here to perform maintenance on those systems already installed. That takes a much shorter time than an installation and upgrading. Her words opened a trap door beneath the floor of my happiness. I shut my eyes to the pain of her news enfolded me like a heating blanket on an already stiflingly hot day. No, you can't mean that, Vonnie, I said, suddenly desperate to have her say that she was joking, that her presence was something permanent. But in my deepest heart, I suppose I knew all along that her stay would not be so. Among the colonies, Felians were an itinerant people, like the gypsies of old Earth, but with a homeland and, for the most part, respected and feared rather than reviled. Why would Savannah or her father's crew be any different? Still, it didn't stop me from pleading with her. Please, can't be true, can it? I'm sorry, Jules, Savannah said. Her eyes avoided meeting mine, and she seemed to be holding back a great deal more emotion than she was letting on. I wish it weren't true, but we were never going to be here permanently. But I had several years with you the last time. We don't have years now, Savannah said. It's just not possible. Oh, Vonnie. I rested my hands on her shoulders as I swayed, fighting against tears. Only a month. And who knows when I'll see you again, if ever. Savannah was silent at this. She had been facing the floor as she broke the news to me, the same as when we were children, back when she hit me with the news of her leaving. Even then I was old enough to know that distance and the uncertainty of communication with the Thelian government made long-term communication lines between planets and Thelian ships spotty at best, non-existent at worst. There would be no way to stay in touch with Savannah, no matter how badly I wanted it. I felt sick, and at once I thought that I would never be happy again. My eyes shut and remained closed as I felt Savannah move closer to me and wrap her arms around my waist. I felt her press herself against my chest, and I felt her tears seep into the fabric of my shirt. I ought to have moved away from such closeness with her, but I refused to allow my cultural decorum to interfere with this. This was our moment, our sadness, and we shared it together. But in our shared sadness and heartache over what was to be, I was struck by a notion so plain as for it to be almost ludicrously simple. Savannah was here, and now was now. She was not about to be ripped from my life for several weeks yet. Why ought we to cry now? You know, Vonnie, there's no use crying over the inevitable, I said. Without thinking about it, I stroked my hand through Savannah's surprisingly thick falls of ebony hair as she lifted her violet-eyed gaze towards me. Understanding awakened, and she seemed to steel herself within against her sorrow, the same as I had. I guess you're right, she said, turning suddenly away as if embarrassed to have shown this side of herself to me. She never cried as a child, not even when we were forced to part ways. Even on that fateful day, no tears escaped her eyes. She simply kept her haunted, violet-eyed gaze upon me the entire time her people made their procession to her father's ship, staring at me until the hatch sealed shut, irrevocably separating us. Today was the first time I had ever seen her cry. I suggest that we make the most of the time we have together, I said. I can't stop you from leaving, and let's face it, you wouldn't want to stay here even if it was with me. Gently and without comment, I brushed aside the remaining tears from her furry cheek. But what we can do is have the best time we ever had for this month that we have left. I have nothing but the fondest memories of us from when we were kids. So now as adults, we can have memories that are even better than before. She sniffled once, and then slowly a smile returned to her face. You look better with a smile, I said with confidence, and gave her a small self-deprecating laugh. I hope it always makes something as simple as looking at a situation in the right way to bring one back to your face. Savannah laughed, and we continued our walk in the arboretum. This time she did not need to place her hand in mine. I sought hers out. After Savannah and I parted, the incomprehensible, painful burn accosted me worse than last night, erasing all misgivings I had about Keisha in the process. Not caring that the news would most likely find Chester's ears again, I called her. To lessen the likelihood of anyone else I knew finding out, I arranged our rendezvous at a rival pleasure house in a more remote sector of the city. The change of venue was inconsequential to the desire I felt, and I drained it all in Keisha. As the night before went, only exhaustion stopped us. Wow, Jules, her voice came out in a long, very satiated drawl. I didn't think you'd be up for a round two. I frowned at her words. This time Keisha did not allow her exhaustion to kill her ability to speak. Quickly I masked my expression as I turned to face her. So I have to ask, what brought it on? Why the sudden interest? It was only by good fortune that my exhaustion had left me quite few of words, and I could not think of a good lie for this occasion even if I could speak. I don't know, I whispered, giving only the briefest, embarrassed truth I knew. My fire had burned out, and still I did not understand why it happened, or why I chose Keisha to sate that desire.
To be honest, any woman would have worked, but something constantly, irrevocably drew me back to her. I turned towards her sleepy face and made as genuine a smile as I dared. "But I don't see you complaining." "Oh, not at all," Keisha said with a giggle that reminded me of Servana. That recollection reignited the fire, and I suppressed a gasp. Keisha, fortunately, did not see my momentary startled expression as she yawned at the very same moment. "You can call me any time, lover." Her eyes fluttered closed, and she said no more that night. I lay there studying the details of her body, a bit more muscular than most women, but otherwise quite shapely and with breasts that were neither too large nor too small. She was very attractive, and any man, I surmised, would be quite privileged to have her. I imagined that if it were made public, every unfixed man in the city would crush their beer cans in jealousy at me. So why was I, throes of the burn aside, so unattracted to her, yet forced to pour all the passion generated by this agonizing pull into her during sex to the point where I could barely move? And most importantly, why was I taken by this burning lust that had caused me to seek her out like I had? Where the hell did it come from? I found it difficult to get to sleep, as those thoughts that spun through my head, coupled with the vestige of the burn, erased some of my exhaustion. The vestige smoldered in its place, irritatingly plaintive. I wanted to wake Keisha up, to pin her down and make love to her again as one possessed, but I pulled hard upon the reins of that desire. Whether my restraint was born of shame or concern for Keisha's well-being, I don't know. I simply let the frustrating, aching burn, a shadow of its former self, haunt the back of my mind until sleep could not help but claim me. As usual, Keisha was gone when I awoke, and again my clothes, which she had nearly ripped off in her passions, lay horribly wrinkled upon the floor. I checked my watch and groaned at how late I'd slept. I would have to hurry if I didn't want to be late for work. This particular pleasure house, for reasons I could not fathom, had no shower stall, and so I had to hurry home on the other side of the city, clean myself off, and report to the airlock in less than an hour. The delay to the train station was only 10 minutes, but it was enough time to make me frantic once I arrived home. Hurriedly, I punched in my code, and the door opened to another voice that again frightened me nearly to death. I nearly threw the knife into the darkness before the lights came on. "You never call, you never write," Chester said, reclining on my couch, a smug grin plastered on his rounded face. I was beginning to think he didn't like me. "Damn it! Does my home have a freaking revolving door or something?" I exclaimed, hurriedly sheathing my knife. I stalked inside and took off my wrinkled shirt, heading for the bathroom. At least Chester's being there was much more normal than Servana's, seeing how, as a part of security for the company, he had master codes to every mining employee's home. Jeez, first Vonnie and now you. Now don't think I've completely forgiven you for that other night. "Vonnie?" I heard Chester say as I passed through my bedroom. "Yeah, my friend Servana," I said, hopped into the shower stall and set it to quick mode. I'd heard nothing more in the torrent of water and cleansers until it was done, and I opened the door and reached blindly for a towel from the nearby rack. When I opened my eyes, I saw Chester in the doorway to my bedroom, which I admit startled me again. "Hey, invasion of privacy much?" I said, regaining my composure. "That's a Felian name," Chester said. "What is?" "Servana." And then I remembered what I said a few minutes ago. Crap. "Don't tell me you're two-timing Keisha for a freaking cat dog," Chester said, grimacing at my reaction. "What? No!" I did not know which offended me more, Chester's accusation or the use of the derogatory term people use for Felians. I hopped into my underwear and then pushed past Chester to get to my room. "Remember how I used to whine about that friend I had who left when I was a kid?" "You mean she was Felian?" Chester said, his voice cracking a bit at the last word. "Yeah," I said. "I never told you?" "Obviously not," Chester said, his tone surprisingly harsh. "And you two never—" "We were kids," I said, pausing in the middle of unbuttoning my pants and looking directly his way to make my point. "And no, not even now, but she and I were very good friends." "When you were kids," Chester said. "Yeah, so?" "You're an adult now, Jules." "I'm still not getting you." "She's a Felian!" "And so that means I shouldn't be friends with her?" I said, pulling my shirt on. "Look, Chester, I can tolerate you being in the know about Keisha and me, as long as you don't make some big production about it. But
if you're going to try to re-ingratiate yourself with me after that other night, you're failing miserably. And I'll be damned if I need someone to tell me who I can't be friends with. I think that my words got through to Chester, but it was obvious that I'd hurt him somewhat. Jules, he spoke my name with far less abrasiveness than before. I'm looking out for you, man. It's kind of a rare sight for someone to be close to the cat dogs outside of the elders and the sub-council. Yeah, and I've always wondered why, I said. They're actually quite friendly once you get to know them. They're a little too friendly, if you ask me, Chester said, and shuddered. You're acting as if one started coming on to you, I said, half joking, but Chester's reaction spoke volumes. He needed only to look away with a sour expression that told me all I needed to know. Oh, wow, I said. Yeah, can you believe it? No, I said. I can't possibly believe that you turned down a girl coming on to you. What? Chester was appalled, his face reddened in anger. You actually think I... And then he paused mid-rant as he observed the very telling smile upon my face. Payback for the other night, I remarked smugly as I resumed trying to tie the laces of my boots. Bastard. Sticks and stones, man. That wasn't funny. Yes, it was. Jules, you accused me of having sex with an alien, Chester said. Maybe you're freaky like that, I said with a laugh. Oh, I will get you back for this, Chester betrayed a small smile of his own. Good luck, I said, and slipped the leg of my pants over the boot and stood up. You know, this begs the question of why you're here. I mean, aren't you even worried about being late for work? Chester's expression went completely blank. Jules, did you even check your email? Email? I said flatly, and then realized that I did not have my phone on my person. Urgently, due to time, I ran back to the bathroom and fished it out of the hamper. In the hologram, I discovered the male icon in the top left-hand corner of the hologram that I, in my haste, had not noticed before. I touched it and read the information. A dust storm? I said. A big-ass dust storm, Chester corrected. It's covering New Vallis, Cerulean, and Imberia, and it won't let up for the better part of the day. All mining operations are grounded. I gave a low whistle. That's over 100 miles in either direction. It's the big-ass part, Chester said. You know, even if you were running late, I could cover for you. But anyway, I think that you can dress in something a bit more comfortable now. Yeah, I said, now feeling more than a little awkward and uncomfortable in my work uniform. And that was when I noticed that Chester's clothes were normal civvies, rather than the black Kevlar uniform of mining security personnel. Grateful to change my own clothes, I did. By the way, I said to Chester, who now waited in the living room as I dressed, why did you break into my home? To let you know about the dust storm, Chester replied. I paused. So you were that certain I'd forget to check my email? Your record speaks for itself, Chester said. Point taken, I said, and resumed dressing. So, this friend of yours is a felon? Chester asked after several minutes. Last time I checked. Well, if that's the case, Chester said with bewilderment in his tone, then how can you resist? Resist? I said. Yeah, that felon chick I told you about was all over me last night. Pretty insistent, too. Said that she could get me aboard their ship for more privacy, if I was worried about what other people would say. Took every bit of strength I had not to take her up on it. Is your apathy so strong that you can push away a felon? I mean, you sure weren't able to push away Keisha. I felt a flare of anger at his insinuation, but quickly pushed it down. I wasn't about to explain what I couldn't even understand myself, and I had no desire to get Chester's lecherous opinion of it. She's not an Ankyafelian, I said. She's a Reykjafelian. Oh, well, I guess that's a little bit better, Chester said. If you had gotten that kind of Felian, I'd have to wonder if you were into animals or something. They're hardly animals, I snapped, unable to tolerate that particular barb. In fact, they're probably more civilized than most humans I know. Well, the Ankyafelians are supposed to be the ruling class. I guess you're right, Chester said in grudging acquiescence. So you've gotten in good with the leaders. She's the director's daughter. You're serious? It's just a friend, I warned. I had finished dressing and stepped out into the living room. I hadn't seen her since I was 10. And you've been spending the past couple of days together? She'll only be here for a month, I said. So we've decided to spend as much time as we can together. Chester's expression became sullen and troubled. I'm not sleeping with her, damn it! Hey, I never said you were, he protested. I can read you like a book. Well, then you can't blame me for thinking that.
You're right, I said. I can't. I keep forgetting how pervy your point of view is. Chester sighed with almost parental patience. Look, Jules, like I said before, I'm just looking out for you. Why? Why? Chester was completely incredulous. Can you imagine what might happen to you if people suspect you're getting sweet on a Fellion, and a Rekia one at that? Your breeding privileges might be revoked, and you know what that means? Worst case scenario is that you'll be considered a genetic threat and purged, and there won't be a damn thing I can do about it. Look, Chester, don't get your panties in a twist, I said coolly. You're overreacting. I have to spell it out for you. She's just a friend. Like, getting with her is not going to happen. Got it? Though Chester seemed mollified by what I said, I wasn't completely certain of it. The one thing I was sure of was that I wanted to put as much distance between us as possible, at least for today. Look, I don't know if you have any plans for today, I said, but I've been losing valuable time to get some of my art projects done. I'm about to head off to the skylight. It's almost noon, Chester exclaimed. You'll roast like a chicken up there. Not during a dust storm. Oh, right. If you're harder for company, you can come with me, I said out of politeness rather than true want of company. Nah, your idea of a good time is too boring, Chester said, much to my relief. Remember I had to teach you how to have a proper good time? Yeah, I rolled my eyes. I suppose your good time today happens to be a six-pack, gestalt fights on the tank, and a girl at your side, perhaps two? Not necessarily in that order, Chester said, unabashed. The faintest ghost of a smile played upon the edge of his mouth. You know me too well. Yeah, and I still can't tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The skylight was slightly warm, but not uncomfortably so, as I stood there looking out at the dust storm's shifting wall of gray and brown, intermittently revealing and concealing the scarred landscape. I had not been able to muster the inspiration to work on my art, and for the last few minutes my gaze had remained transfixed upon the scene far below, separated by hundreds of feet, in addition to the 3 feet of vitroplast that protected against winds that could rip a man's flesh from its bones. The hypnotic shifting of dust and wind brought to mind a time from long ago. I looked to my right and saw Servana as I remembered her, a small, skinny Fellion girl whose tail whipped from side to side with insatiable interest. Everything on my world was new and fascinating to her, and yet the more I explained in our days together, the more depressed she became. It was here where she told me why. I miss my home, Servana said, her little feet dangling off the edge of the railing. It was close enough to the skylight so that there was no danger of falling, but I was still nervous. Your feet are gonna get stuck, I said. She made a tiny hiss at me, which was the same as someone sticking her tongue out at you. I shrugged at this, no longer intimidated by the sound, as I ate the raisins from the bag of mixed fruit that my parents had given me. I had offered Servana some earlier, but she didn't like the taste. So why do you miss your home, Vani? I asked. Is it because of your mom? Servana shook her head. I learned a while back that her mother had died on Anrahara when she was still very young. She had been very weak for a Fellion, and did not live much longer than 3 years beyond Servana's birth, but those had been happy days for her. Her father left the home world after her mother's death, possibly to avoid the pain. It's just that this planet isn't like my home at all. It's rocky, it's dry, dust gets in my fur, the people don't like us, and it's boring. I'm not boring, I protested. Didn't I bring you to Blue Point just yesterday? Yeah, but it's nothing like our home, Servana said wistfully. I sat there unsure of how to cheer her up, but then her expression suddenly brightened on its own. She slipped away from the edge of the railing and scooted over close to me. You know, you're right. You're not boring at all, Jules. You make it fun. So you see, I said, grinning broadly, despite my slight discomfort at having a girl so close to me, it's not that boring here. No, I said you make it fun, Servana corrected. Without you, I think I'd get bored to death. Nah, I said, waving dismissively. You want to know why I think you're fun? Servana said, drawing out the word why with a curious grin. Why? This is why, she said, taking me completely off guard as she pounced and began to tickle my sides mercilessly. She had learned of that human reaction quite by accident when her tail had swept across a very ticklish part of my stomach, and it had quickly made a game of it at my expense. Thankfully, I had no raisins in my mouth as she assaulted my sides. I think that this memory would have had a much more negative end if I'd had. She tickled me until I screamed uncle 3 times for good measure. After I had recovered from my conniption fit and subsequent consternation, she leaned forward and nuzzled my cheek.
"You're my friend, aren't you?"
she whispered. I could never stay angry when I looked into those large violet eyes. They were more disarming to me than any words.
"Yeah,"
I said at length. I tried a show of nonchalance, but she and I both knew that I was genuine. So, it was at this place where Savannah and I truly became friends. My vision suddenly went dark, with the pressure of velvet-textured palms and a familiar powdery scent that wafted into my nose.
"Guess who found you?"
Savannah said, whispering. "Guess who figured you'd find me?" I said.
"I didn't surprise you at all."
Savannah sounded crestfallen as her hands fell away from my eyes. "Maybe just a little," I said in concession. "I'm guessing you found out about the dust storm and figured the rest out."
"Of course," Savannah said. "You weren't home again, and so I went to the next logical place."
"You must have been one step behind me," I said. "I just got here."
"Then I guess that makes me lucky."
Savannah took my hand, and once again I was both surprised and glad about how quickly it began to feel normal.
"So, what do you want to do today?"
"Well, there's not much to do in New Vallis," I said, "unless alcohol and sports in the tank are your cup of tea." Savannah wrinkled her tiny nose at this, and I laughed. "Obviously not."
"Well, then, there's only one thing left to do."
I started towards the elevator.
"Blue Point?"
Savannah asked excitedly. I paused in my tracks and fixed Savannah with a wry grin. "You knew I'd suggest that, didn't you?"
"I might have guessed it," Savannah replied innocently.
"Well, we ought to go there from now on, if we're not to die of boredom," I said, amused at the mischievous streak that she cultivated. She could be that way when we were children, but she lacked subtlety then. Now it was a different game entirely, and she'd honed her skills somewhat. Blue Point was the pride and joy of the city of Cerulean. One part mall, one part zoo, and another part theme park resort. There were sales, dances, restaurants, performances, and games of all kinds during any given time of the day and night. Not a day went by there that there wasn't something to do or some sort of event going on. It was also gruesomely expensive to live in, and because of this, most of its workers commuted daily from smaller nearby towns. It also happened to be, I discovered as we boarded the train, a place where Felians offered their work shifts visited in droves. This wasn't surprising, as when I was a child, the attitudes towards fraternizing with aliens in Cerulean were just a bit more liberal than anywhere else on Zinj.
"Oh, it's like I remember it,"
Savannah said, as we and several other assorted human and Felian groups exited the train. We ascended the escalator out of the train station and emerged to Cerulean's main cavern. It was beyond massive, 5 miles long, 2 miles in width, with 5 waterfalls encircling its distant walls. Its ceiling was a mile in height, 10 times higher than the cavern that housed New Vallis' arboretum. 5 enormous sun lamps were clustered at its center, providing ample light and heat for all, brightening and dimming with the rhythms of the day and night. Holographic emitters lined the ceiling, casting a blue sky with wispy clouds during the day and star-strewn heavens at night. Right now it was just past noon and a perfect artificial day. People went to and fro about the pavilions, buying food and wares both mundane and exotic in the open air markets. Some pavilions, Savannah and I noticed, were run by Felians who peddled exotic baubles on their off time. People jostled about while children ran happily amongst them, stringing balloons behind them, or with fists full of candy, or with toys both mechanical and virtual, tagging along behind them as they played, some happily including Felians in their company. I saw myself as I was years ago, running among them, with Savannah close beside me. It was a refreshing sight to see Felians interacting so freely among humans with no fear of reproach.
"I remember when my people installed that," Savannah said, pointing to the fake sky. "Father told me how excited you were to have a sky again. Why was that?"
"Zinj had a sky like that once," I said, passing through the crowds with her. "Long ago, before the Imperium Wars, this planet was once beautiful, and we could live on the surface. It was said that it was the most Earth-like out of all the colonies, but that was probably just propaganda. There was a lot of that before the wars."
"Probably more so on Zinj, since it was the capital of the old Imperium," Savannah said.
"Yeah, and we're still paying the price for that arrogance," I said, folding my arms as my eyes remained rested upon the sky hologram. "I guess this thing helps us regain a bit of what we lost when the planet was nuked to hell, if at least in representation only."
"Happy thoughts, Jules,"
Savannah reminded me, grinning sweetly. It was generations ago anyway, I said, and let go of that melancholy. I found myself much more carefree as I took her advice, and we went forth to find whatever adventures awaited us. Alright, so that ends part 2 for now. I would really appreciate any feedback you could give me, and I will return with more, with a bit more of the story, of course. And like I said, I would really love to hear your comments or even questions if you have any. More is going to be coming, and so until then, guys, this is DecKrash, better known as Brandon. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay lucky and stay blessed.